Caught my husband generating AI porn while pregnant. He lied about it being his first time. Now I'm questioning everything. Flushed face. I am a 29-year-old female married to a 31-year-old male and 29 weeks pregnant with our first child. I am making this post because I seek honest and impartial feedback from both men and women concerning this challenging situation. I have reached a point where I am contemplating divorce, which is frightening to even consider, especially since I am currently unemployed. There is a great deal to address here. My husband and I have been married for nearly 5 years, and I previously believed we had a relatively healthy marriage until recently. He has always engaged in behaviors I dislike, particularly his drinking habits and communication style, which often involves yelling at me because he believes he is direct and has no control over his temper, though he has never physically harmed me. Lately, however, our arguments have intensified and new issues have come to light. A few months back, I discovered that he had been viewing pornography, which I did not initially see as an issue because I occasionally watch it as well. However, when he learned that I viewed porn, he completely lost control. He claimed I was being unfaithful by watching it and that our marriage would fail unless I stopped, stating he had strong moral objections to porn and struggled with it since childhood. We both agreed to refrain from watching it. That was until 2 nights ago. While preparing dinner, I caught a glimpse of him looking at images of naked women, and he was typing, causing new photographs to appear. He was creating artificial intelligence-generated pornography. I lost my composure, not due to the porn itself, but rather the hypocrisy. I shouted some expletives and asked, "Are you making AI porn?" He initially responded with confusion, saying, "What?" but quickly fell silent before admitting, "I guess I was." For a brief moment, I considered waiting to gather my thoughts before replying, but I wanted to confront him directly since he has deceived me about his drinking before, even when I was convinced he was lying. So, I was pleased to have caught him and was hopeful we could discuss it. Our conversation quickly shifted to me inquiring about how he was doing it, and he mentioned he downloaded an app he had seen advertised. He insisted it was his first time using it, expressing shame about it, and when I asked if he had ever used it before, he answered, "I have never used the app before." I wanted to clarify if he meant just that specific app, to which he responded that he had never used any app like it until now. I needed to be precise because he has previously chosen his words carefully around his drinking, managing to avoid outright lies while maintaining a facade. I pointed out that he seemed very skilled at using the app for someone who had just downloaded it, to which he downplayed it, suggesting it was user-friendly. He assured me he had uninstalled it and would not use it again. Despite his reassurances, I felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Even more troubling was his apparent lack of genuine remorse for his actions. He seemed more upset about being caught than about what he had done. The following morning, yesterday, I asked to see his phone, something I had never done before. Thanks to sound advice from other users online with secretive partners, I reviewed his screen time and identified the app he had been using, Channel AI. I also checked his app history and found the download button indicating it was no longer on his phone, but noted he had installed it back in 2014. Additionally, there were other apps related to generating AI pornography and chatbots. It became clear that he had lied about how long he had used that app and about it being the only one he had ever used for such activities. I was heartbroken. Yet he reassured me how sorry he was, repeating the same excuse that it was something he had battled since childhood, and he acknowledged it was wrong. As the day progressed, my mind began to whirl with overanalysis once more. After dinner, I posed some additional questions. Had he ever used AI to generate pornographic images of people he knew? He said no. Had he interacted with the AI before? He admitted yes. At this point, it felt more like infidelity since he was not merely looking at porn but forming a rapport with it and soliciting specific images as he would from another individual. Only this entity could not refuse him. It seemed like a form of cheating devoid of the complications or rejection of a real relationship since he maintained complete control. I inquired if he understood the reasons behind his viewing habits, thinking that understanding might help him identify triggers and refrain from engaging in it. Was it boredom? A desire to enhance our intimacy? Immediate gratification? He dismissed my inquiries, saying it was not a deep issue and merely a natural instinct as a man, no specific reason, and I was overthinking it. I then asked if he recognized he had an issue with pornography and wanted us both to stop. If it had been a conflict since his youth, I needed to know how he planned to handle it differently to avoid temptation and prevent a recurrence. Insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results, so I needed his reassurance of a plan. Otherwise, I knew we would have the same discussion in the future when this issue arose again. I suggested therapy or merely improved communication between us. Instead of him lying, he should feel comfortable sharing anytime he contemplated viewing it so I could support him as his partner. I emphasized that I would never judge him for this or become angry, provided he remained honest. If he told me we could navigate it together, but if I discovered it on my own, it would not be acceptable. Again, he said I was overanalyzing and became defensive. That night, the unease returned. I felt as if I were exerting so much effort to resolve this issue, help him, and sustain our marriage. However, it appeared he was only focused on justifying his actions to move past the situation and was shutting me out. In my overthinking state, I downloaded the app myself to explore how it functioned. However, after a few minutes, I felt uncomfortable and promptly uninstalled it. When I reviewed my screen time, I discovered it no longer appeared. Apparently, screen time on Apple devices, which we both use and obtained simultaneously, does not display deleted apps, but hidden applications can show up. Therefore, I began to suspect he had concealed it. When I confronted him again and requested to check his phone, this time his screen time feature was disabled. When I asked why he turned it off, he claimed to be frustrated with its notifications. However, screen time only issues one notification weekly on Sunday, and this occurred on a Tuesday evening. Thus, he was lying. I also pointed out that it was unusual for him to tolerate notifications for all those years up until the moment I used it to uncover his deceit. He became defensive and angrily yelled, asking if I intended to start micromanaging him. He turned off screen time to start fresh. A fresh start should have involved moving forward from this turmoil. Disabling screen time felt more like a strategy to conceal matters from me, ensuring he could continue undiscovered. Over the past few years, I had believed if anything could drive us apart, it would be his alcohol use. Yet, here we are. The issue is not solely about the pornography, but rather the dishonesty and deceitfulness. The lack of willingness to communicate or enact change weighs heavily on me. He consistently refuses to consider therapy and twists situations around to make them my responsibility. Am I being overbearing? Certainly at this stage, because I feel like I have lost all trust in him. I do believe he would never cheat on me physically. Although I am unsure if emotional infidelity exists, it certainly feels that way. The time and energy he dedicates to generating pornography and communicating with it would have been redeeming if directed toward our faltering relationship. I feel disrespected, unloved, and undervalued. I have been advocating for couples therapy for quite some time to enable us to better understand each other and engage in healthier arguments that do not involve shouting, noting he would not be attacked, but rather it would create space for him to share his perspective while we learned how to communicate effectively and improve as partners. However, he is fiercely against therapy, asserting that our marriage would fail if we pursued it. It is already failing due to our refusal to seek help, and either he is unwilling to recognize that or simply does not care. Moreover, although we are anticipating our first child together, we have suffered 3 early miscarriages, leading us to foster a 2-year-old for 5 months. Initially, he was a wonderful father, but towards the end of that period, he began losing control over his anger and drinking again. He would consume 6 or more shots of vodka each night and was easily provoked. He would either shout at the child or me in front of the child. This caused that child to experience issues at daycare, where he would scream at other children. I convinced myself with what he told me that it was more challenging for him to exhibit patience with someone else's child. Consequently, we stopped fostering, but I am increasingly worried about his capacity for patience with anyone, whether it is our child, myself, or another individual. He may be an alcoholic, but if so, he is a functioning one who conceals his habits well, aside from his anger. Or perhaps it is simply alcohol misuse. I am uncertain. He has never encountered legal difficulties, no driving under the influence charges, no accidents, and we have never faced financial issues, although he did lose a job because of microdosing psilocybin, which I feel partially responsible for since that was my suggestion, hoping it might aid him in quitting alcohol after his father's passing, given his struggles. He surprised me by stating he accepts responsibility for that decision. He prides himself on being honest, which ultimately led to his job loss after failing a polygraph examination. But he cannot pride himself on honesty while lying to me unless, once again, his issue is not about dishonesty per se, but rather the fear of being caught. I welcome your thoughts or feedback. I realize this is a significant matter to unpack. I detest feeling like a wife who monitors her husband closely, acknowledging this could exacerbate his behavior, but I feel as though I have no alternative. It deeply hurts me that he has not even tried to pursue therapy. Typically, I would use all this information to ultimately arrive at a decision regarding divorce. Yet, since I am in my 3rd trimester of pregnancy and unemployed, I am terrified. We maintain separate bank accounts, so logistically I believe it would not be overly complex to initiate the process, but I am anxious about the prospect of being a single parent while searching for a job with a newborn. Living in the United States, I would not be eligible for family and medical leave unless employed for a full year, so attempting to find work for a few weeks prior to giving birth and subsequently seeking a new position does not seem practical. Additionally, I feel overwhelmed about depleting my savings for legal expenses, as I understand that in divorce cases, lawyers typically profit the most. I do not possess a fortune, but I have approximately $10,000, which may last for a brief period. Fortunately, I am not in debt. I do not wish to see him lose his home if we reconcile later, especially given today's market conditions. Thankfully, my retired parents could accommodate me if necessary, but that would not be easy due to the limited space, and I would prefer not to impose upon them either. What I anticipated would be the most joyous phase of my life, pregnancy, has turned into one of the most stressful and frightening periods, full of uncertainty. Ultimately, I am seeking your advice on what you would do or suggest in my situation. Should I try to work through these difficulties? Should I abandon the relationship? For anyone who has faced a similar dilemma, what has helped you navigate it or restore trust? Alternatively, is it hopeless? For the men reading this, how would you expect your wife to react if you were in his position? Thank you for taking the time to read this lengthy post. I appreciate your responses. Story 2. After years of abuse, I'm now friends with my ex. He just got out of prison, and I'm torn between supporting him and my husband. This is the 3rd community in which I have shared my story, seeking guidance. Individuals are reading my posts, but so far, only one person has commented, and that was merely to claim that my account is fabricated. I am looking for advice, not to be accused of deceit. If you do not believe my story is genuine, please just pretend it is and share your thoughts on how I should proceed. Thank you. Brace yourself, as this narrative may be lengthy. In 2006, I, 34 female, met the father of my children shortly after I turned 16. I was at a bar with my mother. This establishment also functioned as a restaurant and karaoke venue, which meant that as long as I was accompanied by a parent, I could enter as a minor, and there were other minors present too. However, I was the only minor there who was attempting to connect with men alongside my mother. My relationship with my mother over the first 32 years of my existence was tumultuous and is a story in itself. While at the bar, I encountered a man whom I will refer to as Greg. He was 23 years old at the time and is now approaching 42. Our birthdays fall on the same day, creating a precise 7-year age difference. We spent some time together at the bar, after which I asked my mother if I could accompany him to a restaurant and then to a party at his friend's home. She agreed, provided that I returned before dawn. I recognized this was not ideal, but as a teenager, I felt exhilarated. Fast forward a year, during which he virtually moved in with me and my mother. Eventually, I found myself in trouble for something I can no longer recall, and my mother sent me to live with my aunt and uncle, about 30 minutes away. My aunt and uncle prohibited me from seeing Greg because of our age difference, but I defied their wishes. After months of sneaking around with him, my aunt and uncle finally became exasperated and, after failing to involve law enforcement to have him arrested for statutory offenses, sent me back to my mother. Upon being confronted by my aunt, my mother forbade me from seeing Greg any longer. Nevertheless, I continued to see him and eventually got caught. At that point, my mother told us that we would have to marry if we wished to maintain our relationship. So, we did. She signed for the marriage since I was underage, and before I reached 17, I became a wife. I later learned that he had been using methamphetamine throughout our marriage. On our 1-month anniversary, he left me and betrayed my trust for the first time. He engaged in affairs with anyone willing. He also said extremely hurtful things to me, labeling me a terrible wife, a promiscuous woman, and more. While he was not initially physically abusive, it eventually escalated to violence, particularly during his withdrawal from drugs. In 2008, approximately 2 months before the birth of our eldest daughter, we were living with my mother, and he worked at a cafe in town. One day, he returned from work and announced that he had a surprise for me. He claimed that his former boss had offered him his job back, and that since we were expecting a baby, he could let us move into his rental property and deduct $100 weekly from his paycheck for rent while we would cover utilities. He said we could move in that same day. This was a major red flag, but I was young and gullible, and I believed him. I was ecstatic, as we had never had our own place before, and we were finally going to have a space to welcome our daughter. My mother was equally thrilled. We quickly packed our belongings, and he instructed me to place all of my things in the back of the car. We drove a hatchback, since I had more possessions. Although it felt odd, I complied. We stowed my belongings in the trunk and his in the back seat. When we started to leave, he insisted we stop by his mother's house for another portion of the surprise. He was visibly excited to reveal whatever it was, and I couldn't help but feel thrilled too. Notably, he had mentioned that the women at work had assisted in planning this surprise for him throughout the day. I thought it was charming. As we drove to his mother's house, he explained how the surprise would work. Our rings were at Walmart being resized, and he told me he would drop me off at his mother's for a scavenger hunt while he picked up our rings. By the time I finished the scavenger hunt, he would return with my surprise. Upon arriving at his mother's home, he explained everything to her, handing her an envelope that I was not to open until precisely 30 minutes after he departed. The envelope contained clues leading me from one envelope to the next, culminating in him being there with my surprise at the end. I was overjoyed. I sat at the kitchen table with his mother for 30 minutes, speculating about the surprise. She believed it would be jewelry, while I thought it might be a puppy. Time passed, and after 30 minutes she handed me the envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. It read, "Haha, you foolish woman. Your belongings are outside by Grandma's van." I rushed outside, and there it was. He had torn open all my bags and dumped my possessions in the mud. The rain poured down as I stood there for hours, surrounded by my belongings and 7 months pregnant. Eventually, his mother came outside and told me she doubted he would return and that I needed to call my mother. My mother came to pick me up, and I was heartbroken. This was the first traumatizing act he imposed upon me, but certainly not the worst or the final one. We endured a pattern of on-again, off-again for years. I will not claim to have been perfect. About 2 years into our marriage, I began to cheat as well. Although I don't intend to excuse my actions, I was raised in an environment with men frequently entering and leaving my mother's life. After being treated horrendously by him for 2 years, during which he always accused me of infidelity, I eventually retaliated by cheating. That phase of my life lasted 2 years. It was a toxic situation, and soon violence escalated. Our first daughter was born in July 2008, followed by our second daughter in May 2009. They are 10 months and 3 days apart. When I was approximately 6 months pregnant with my second daughter, I returned home early from work to find him in bed with another woman while my daughter cried in the other room. I expelled the woman, and a confrontation ensued. He prevented me from reaching my daughter, who was screaming in the next room. He then forced me onto my stomach and violated me violently. I felt my daughter moving inside me amid the pressure from his weight on top of me. My stomach was pressed into the mattress while my eldest daughter continued to scream. This was not the first time I had been subjected to such an act. During our marriage, he was arrested twice and imprisoned for assault and family violence resulting from his attacks on me. There were countless other instances that typically horrify those I share them with, but I believe I have conveyed enough for you to understand the nature of my experience with him. The final straw for me was comparatively minor. I discovered he had been unfaithful yet again, and that was enough for me. I was finished with him. This was also around the time I uncovered that he had been using methamphetamine throughout our marriage. Now, for the beginning of my own happiness. I met my husband. My husband, 32 male, and I crossed paths in 2016 when I was 26, and we fell deeply in love. We began living together and tied the knot in 2018 when I was 28. We have been partners for 8 years now and married for almost 7. He truly is remarkable. He is a supportive husband, a fantastic stepfather, a dedicated worker, and he neither drinks nor uses drugs. Our initial year together was challenging. It required significant effort on my part to rebuild trust in another man, as everything he did seemed too good to be true to me. My husband demonstrated a great deal of patience as he helped me heal a heart he did not break. Ultimately, we navigated through that first year and have only grown stronger since. Around 4 years ago, my ex-husband was imprisoned again for assault and family violence against another woman. For the first 2 years of his incarceration, we did not communicate, but he later wrote a letter to my mother, asking her to petition the parole board. I also ended up writing such a letter, propelled by our children's desire for him to be released. Following that, he contacted me, surprised I would do that for him. We began exchanging letters and he expressed remorse for how he had treated me in the past. His apology was sincere, and due to my infidelity during those 2 years, I felt I had contributed to the disastrous nature of our marriage. Given that we share children together, I made the choice to befriend him. He has burned many of his bridges, and I reasoned that if he had even one genuine friend in his corner, it might help him maintain his sobriety. I discussed this decision with my husband, who, while believing that I owe nothing to my ex, agreed that we would try to support him in getting his life together. My ex-husband was released from prison approximately 2 months ago and sent to a halfway house located about 10 hours away from us. Since his release, I have communicated with him daily. It is important to note that my husband and I have complete access to each other's phones. Our fingerprints are saved in one another's devices, we share logins for our emails, we know each other's passwords, etc. While we do not routinely inspect each other's phones, we have the capability to do so since there is nothing to conceal, and neither of us feels a lack of privacy. This is simply how we operate. We also use an app that enables us to track each other's locations, primarily for safety because I work as a delivery driver. I only speak with my ex-husband on the phone when it is on speaker to ensure my husband feels at ease. He has unrestricted access to anything he wishes to see or know. I often share the text conversation between my ex and me with my husband. He does not ask for it, but I provide it to ensure he feels secure in our marriage. From the depths of my heart, I do not desire or require anyone except my husband. He completes me. I try to make myself available for discussions with my ex because he lacks considerable support, which is his doing, but still, and I would feel terrible if he relapsed and missed more of our children's lives. I recognize that this is not my responsibility, but I can't shake the thought that if we are in his corner, he might feel less hopeless and more motivated to stay sober. He has been very respectful and apologetic towards me, maintaining an appropriate distance and not attempting to reconnect romantically. Although he did confess to my husband that he will always love me, he is glad I found someone who values me. Occasionally, he asks me to send him $10 through an app for a pack of cigarettes, and I comply, but he reimburses me double. I have been unequivocal in my message to him that we will never be together again and that my husband is my soulmate. I do not want nor will I ever want anyone else. Recently, however, I have noticed my husband has been somewhat distant. I can't help but wonder if my friendship with my ex is making him uneasy. I have asked him and reassured him multiple times that if he ever feels uncomfortable, I will sever contact because, ultimately, my marriage holds a higher priority than my ex's sobriety. He insists everything is fine and that as long as I am transparent with him, he does not mind our friendship. I felt compelled to share my thoughts here because I am uncertain whether he hopes I will voluntarily distance myself from my ex without his prompting. I struggle with this because, on my part, I have never crossed any boundaries or broached any inappropriate subjects with my ex, and my intentions are solely for the good of my children. The conversations with my ex are challenging. I must continuously forgive him and remain cautious about what I say since I do not fully trust him. I want to know if I am in the wrong for maintaining a friendship with him. It is only a few years until my children are grown, so perhaps I should simply cut off communication. If he relapses, that would be his responsibility, but I would feel a lingering guilt if he fell back into his old ways after I ended contact. Feel free to ask any questions that might help clarify my situation. Am I the antagonist for being friends with him? Story 3. WTF moment. I passed out, woke up with injuries and no memory. My dad's whiskey story doesn't add up, and I'm terrified of him. I previously wrote about this topic, but I removed it along with everything else on my account because I felt anxious. However, I looked online and discovered that someone had created an archive link for it. The link shows the page, but the comments are not visible there. You can view them on the original post link here. You can access additional comments if you require more context, but to summarize, I, 16-year-old female, lost consciousness after studying one day. When I regained awareness a few hours later, I was quite hurt. My father insisted that I consumed a 1-liter bottle of whiskey and became severely intoxicated, but I do not recall drinking at all, so I find his account hard to accept. I want to clarify something for those who misinterpreted my original post. I am uncertain whether I broke my nose. I mentioned it because it was my first thought. It was painful, slightly swollen, and bleeding significantly. The part of my nose that hurt seemed caved in, unlike the other side, which concerns me. 2 years ago, I broke my nose while playing, and the injury appeared similar, which is why I suspect I may have broken it again. Some in the comments believed I could not be 16 based on my use of paragraph breaks. To clarify, I am indeed 16 years old, and I use them to make my writing more readable, rather than presenting a massive block of text. I also plan to share a few photographs in this post later, showing the blood that remained in my bathroom because my mother overlooked cleaning it. Additionally, I might have a picture of my nose taken the day after the incident, which I will upload if I can find it. It really bothers me when people accuse me of lying, especially when I am telling the truth, so I want to provide these photos as evidence for anyone who needs it. In the comments, most people indicated that they believe my father sexually assaulted me, which was my initial fear. However, a few suggested that I might have a mental illness, such as dissociative identity disorder, or that a seizure could have contributed to my memory loss and injuries. I want to stress that I have no history of such conditions. This is the first occurrence of anything like this. Something inside me urged me to share my experience, but I was hesitant to report it due to concerns I expressed in my original post regarding my father's anger and no real resolution. Today, an incident occurred that was not as severe as the first but still troubling. I went to bed at midnight, and my mother woke me at 6:30 a.m. for school. I felt extremely fatigued and could not motivate myself to rise, prompting my mother to cancel school for me. This is quite unusual, as I often stay awake until 3 or 4 a.m. tackling schoolwork while still managing to wake up for classes. I had more sleep than I usually do, so I should have felt energized. However, my mother was unable to get me out of bed, and I vaguely remember telling her repeatedly that I would wake up in 5 minutes but failed to do so. Finally, she gave up, and I fell back asleep, only to awaken again at 2 p.m. after sleeping for 14 hours. I did not feel rested. Instead, I developed a headache and felt unwell. Although it was better than my initial incident, I completed some homework later and was able to think reasonably well mostly, but I still felt off. Shortly after waking up, I recognized that I had the same strange, unclear sensation in my mind that I experienced during the earlier event. This triggered me to remember everything again, and despite my efforts to avoid thinking about it, I couldn't help myself, prompting me to investigate for any odd signs. Unlike the last time, I did not discover any blood in my room or bathroom. However, I noticed some redness on my neck and that my underwear felt unusual and cold. Upon inspecting it, I found it thoroughly soaked, but it did not seem strange or sticky. It felt like plain cold water covering every inch. Just in case, I removed it and changed, hiding the old pair under my bed. I am unsure if I should report this, as I fear nothing will come of it except my father being upset. Nevertheless, I wanted to keep the evidence accessible if I change my mind later. Apologies for the lengthy message. I have been preoccupied with these thoughts all day. Since I am unsure whether filing a report would help, I considered a different option: running away. I possess nearly $400 in my Cash App account, and I believe I could earn additional funds by shoveling snow, as we recently had a severe snowstorm and more is expected this weekend. It seems plausible because I know someone who earned $2,000 shoveling driveways at $200 each. A person nearby is selling an older car for $950, which I intend to purchase. Each day, I plan to subtly gather a few items from my home that I can discreetly place in my backpack without raising my parents' suspicions, loading them into the vehicle until I have everything necessary while also buying essentials for warmth to conceal in the car. Once I have gathered all my belongings, I would simply not return home one day and choose to live in the car. I would disable the location tracking on my phone so they cannot trace me, and would try to remain out of sight inside the car to prevent break-ins. There is a website affiliated with my school that allows students to present their names to the cafeteria staff when receiving lunch. I would not need cash or a card since money would be automatically deducted from my account. I could change the password so my parents would not be able to access the funds, allowing me to take care of my meals. I could even manage 2 meals a day for lunch and dinner. If they somehow gained access to my account and withdrew the money, I could always seek assistance from a charity or soup kitchen. Thank you for reading this lengthy message if you made it to the end. As I review the entire post, I realize I have gotten somewhat off track, but this is my current plan. I'm not sure why I included it in this post, but I would appreciate advice regarding whether it is a sound proposal and whether I am being unreasonable by mistrusting my father and considering leaving. I understand that some may accuse me of fabricating this story as a means of seeking attention by posting such sensitive information, but please recognize that I have reasons, which I have detailed in this post, to question my own judgments and whether I might be paranoid about the situation, or if there is just cause for concern. I need to be completely certain that my father is the perpetrator, and that I am not simply being paranoid while weighing other possibilities, as it is not worth it if I am unsure of his intentions. Although my father can be harsh, sometimes causing me to feel less attached to him, I deeply care for my mother and worry that my departure would devastate her. Therefore, I must determine whether leaving is necessary. Based on your perspective, do you think I am jumping to conclusions and that there may be other explanations for my suspicions? Or do you concur that the possibility of my father being responsible for my trauma is the most likely scenario, which would justify my feelings of fear towards him and the decision to leave? I could not locate a picture of my nose that I thought I had taken, but my mother neglected to clean the blood beneath the bathroom sink, so here is an image depicting that.